Welcome to the Draft Savages NFL Draft Podcast. I'm your host, Seth Cox. With me tonight, one of my co-hosts, Justis Mosqueda. Justis, how are you?
Doing fine. Removed from my house at this point. Just doing a pod at a lady friend's house, but doing fine. Doing fine. Can't complain too much. It's warm as hell out here in the West Coast. Just living it up.
Well, and for those of you that are listening on our iTunes or Stitcher Radio podcast, after all the abuse, Justice has gotten a haircut, and he's looking sharp. So glad to see you cleaned up for the show. I did not. So I'm married, I have 5 kids. I don't have to clean up for anybody. So, and our guest tonight, special guest, last minute, bailed us out big time, Eric Galko, owner and director of Optimum Scouting. Eric, how are you?
I'm doing well, man. It's 2 weeks till the draft, so I'm excited for it to finally be here. I'm at the point now where scouting is kind of done. I'm just kind of sick of just talking about guys and want to see where they end up. So, I don't know about you guys, but
yeah, I'm with you.
Yeah, there's the never-ending argument, of course, of if player A is better than player B, and it can't be the opposite because we've watched the tape. So, yeah, I'm done with the arguing, and now I like to call this the confirmation bias season, as guys like you and Doug Farrar and other of the bigger names in the draft community start to come out with their rankings. The draft Twitter community comes in with their, look, see, it's okay to like this guy. That's why I've liked this guy all along. Eric Galko liked this guy, so it's okay to like him. So, but we appreciate you joining us and bringing your, not just unique, but your inside and in-depth take to the NFL draft and what you do. Go ahead and tell us a little bit about Optimum Scouting and what you got coming out here in this weekend.
yeah, Optimum Scouting. Also, a lot of our stuff will be over at Sporting News. We're hoping to get all of our scouting reports on sportingnews.com for their drafts database. They can have, hopefully, in the weeks leading up, the last 2 weeks leading up to the draft, and then certainly on draft day, people see all our scouting reports, kind of like an NFL Network has and CBS Sports has. So we're late in getting behind those on there, but hopefully we'll be on there soon. But that'll be on Sporting News. What else? New mock draft coming out next week, of course. New big board coming out next week, final one. Small school rankings next week. Probably one of 2 state of the drafts coming next week, my kind of like rumors posts of stuff I've heard. And then finally, probably leading up to the draft, another mock draft and state of the draft. So kind of a lot of cliche stuff from now on, and probably a few more unique articles for Sport News. I don't want to do one on Eric Armstead and a couple other guys that I've kind of heard a lot of buzz on that maybe deserve a full feature before they end up being, high draft picks. So some fun stuff for the most part, a lot of general stuff coming over Optimum Scouting and Sport News moving forward. But the draft guide, hopefully, I'm aiming to get everything done by Sunday. It's been way delayed due to some other things going on, but hopefully our NFL draft guide is ready to go by Saturday, and it'll be able to purchase for just $199 coming out next week. So it'll be 2 weeks to kind of cram in over 300 reports, scouting notes, and more on there too. So hopefully get that out there by Sunday for a week and a half of the draft people.
Eric and his team produce one of the most in-depth and well put together draft guides that you can find on the internet, and we here at Draft Savages love his work. Justin and Justice highly recommended trying to get Eric on, and so we really appreciate him coming on and talking with us. To get started tonight, I guess the first thing to kind of address, not address, or does it even matter, is Jameis Winston. We all knew it was coming. It's coming. It's come now. I don't remember what lawsuit it is, but is this has no impact, right, on what's going to happen on draft day at this point, Eric?
No, but I think it's just a further kind of affirmation that there's stuff that's going to be lingering with Jameis Winston for a while, and depending on what version of story you hear off the record, on the record about the incident, it's still going to linger. And I think between that and the other things going on, it's a question. I know I was at the sports symposium at Villanova where David Cornwell kind of made that brash statement that kind of gave most of the symposium a lot of credit, but Jameis Winston isn't ready for the NFL off the field despite being ready on the field, and he kind of alluded to the fact that a lot of guys aren't ready on the field. But I think in general, guys being immature, you look at Marcus Mariota has none of the same question marks as Jameis Winston does. Why isn't Mariota being more highly touted as opposed to Winston being forgiven? So I think this actual lawsuit won't have an impact on where he goes on draft day. He's going to go first overall. But I think for the most part, it just kind of adds to the fact that you can't forget that these things are going to linger with Jameis Winston. So that's kind of my take on it, and that's part of the reason why these kind of off-field incidents, as well as On-field stuff I have some concerns about too, nothing major, but on-field stuff he needs to work on. That's why I think I'd probably take Mariota over Winston overall. But obviously the Bucs disagree, and they'll be their quarterback for the future.
That brings us right into the start of the show. When you look at the first pick, and we're going to go over what Eric's hearing, what Justis is hearing, and kind of get their opinions on what are the best fits. Maybe not what they think is going to happen, but what they think should happen. And that brings us right to the Bucs. You just said it. It sounds like Jameis is the pick. A couple guys on Twitter that have some insight have said otherwise, but is that what you're hearing altogether, Eric? Is that it's Jameis Winston here?
Yeah, it's been that way for a while. Really, since almost January, it's been kind of an almost lock. I mean, David Cornwell at that same symposium said, lock it in. He's going first overall. I think the perspective kind of is that the only thing I can see that changing it is an ownership change of heart, and this is going to be an ownership pick. So I guess if anyone's still hoping for some chaos at the top of the draft, it wouldn't be a surprise if we've seen before GMs walk in the door and want to change picks. The Cleveland Browns owner picked Johnny Manziel last year, so I think some owner change of mind may change things. But I think for the most part, it's more about what the Bucs will do. In my opinion, I'm most curious about what happens to Mike Glennon. Jameis Winston's drafted to be the quarterback week one. He's probably expected, no matter where he goes, to be the week one quarterback. The Bucs have kind of floated out Mike Glennon for the past couple of months now as a trade pick. I think you can get him for a 4th or 5th round pick. I'm surprised no teams are looking at him, and I think in general he's not really a good complement to Jameis Winston on your roster. So do they look for another veteran quarterback with Winston there? Do I just vote only Winston only? Do they trade Mike Glennon? Do they have him compete? I think the Mike Glennon dynamic is something I'm more interested about. But I think overall, Winston and the Bucs, he's going to be their starter week one, and we'll see if it was the right decision within a year or two.
When you look at just what you would do, is Mariota the guy you would go with here, or is it maybe a non-quarterback entity for you?
As far as I do, it's hard to say because who's my offensive coordinator? What kind of tools will I have around me? Who's my quarterback to develop? I think Mariota certainly needs, if not a redshirt year, at least a quarterback that can kind of not put any pressure on to play early. I think he'll need a little bit of time to kind of get acclimated. Like most people believe, he has some sort of project to his game, whereas Winston's more ready to play right now. But I think both guys would definitely value from sitting behind someone. I think Winston has some footwork issues and obviously some decision-making issues that he needs to clean up on, especially after his junior year. But I think for the most part, for the Bucs situation, I can't hate the Winston pick because they're looking for a quarterback to play week one. But if I had to pick a quarterback to kind of rest my case on, if I had to pick one of these two guys, I'd take Marcus Mariota just because I feel there's no reason why I think he can't work out at least to some degree in the NFL, and his upside, I think, is far higher than Winston's.
Justis, I know you've been on the Mariota's QB1 train the entire way. Is Tampa with Dirk Cutter, would that work as a fit to you, or does he need to go somewhere? I will say this. Having watched Ken Wisenhunt coach for 5 or 6 years here in Arizona, I think Tennessee is probably the worst fit possible. So I wouldn't want to see that just for Mariota's career's sake. But where do you think would he work with Cutter, and or where do you think is the best fit coach-wise outside of Chip Kelly? You can't take that avenue. That's cheating.
Yeah, I think Chan Gailey would be way up there, right? Like Chan Gailey's a guy that I'd like to see work with him. The Miami offense, but they're not looking for a quarterback at all, and that's essentially the same as the Chip Kelly offense. San Diego's another interesting one because if you watch what Phillip Rivers does in San Diego, especially against like the Seahawks, when he was like torching up the Seahawks, I think that's like peak Mariota, right? Outside of his running ability, just him as a pure passer. When you watch Phillip Rivers just torch that, just beat those coverage linebackers, just eat up the center and stuff like that. I think that's kind of Mariota's peak as a passer. So I'd like to see San Diego, if the rumors are true that San Diego is going to move up to 2 and try to pick Mariota and ship out Phillip Rivers. I don't think he'd be a terrible fit in Tampa, and I think he works. Like the issue is just the transition, right? Like I don't think it's necessarily like he's always going to be bad in X system. I think it's just the transition is going to be longer and it's going to be tougher, especially coming from, that Oregon offense, as much as like people like to criticize it, and then there's like backlash to the criticism and saying, you grade the player, not the system. The system change from, even from college to NFL pro style teams is going to be huge. Like if you guys read that I can't remember, what is it called, The Quarterback by Bruce Feldman. There's a couple there's a couple of quotes and stuff that he pulled from like Peyton Manning when Peyton Manning was talking about his rookie year, and talks with Archie Manning about Peyton, what he said during his rookie year, and Peyton was like, "These guys aren't open. Like, what do I do?" And Archie just kind of laughed it off and was like, "Yeah, that's NFL open. Like, that changed, and that's Peyton Manning." Peyton Manning wasn't playing in that Oregon system where all of his touchdowns were wide open throws. So to say Mariota's transition is probably going to be rough is kind of an understatement. But the past 3 years, he would have been my number one player if he would have declared, even as a redshirt freshman. Just knowing the people at Oregon around Mariota, like, everyone loves him, and everything you say is true. Like, everything that people say about him being, like, saying, like, quote unquote, like, high character, all of that's true.
Eric, that takes us right into number 2. And what are you hearing about that second pick? Are the Titans going to make that pick, or are they shopping it as hard as it seems like they are?
Yeah, I mean, I think they've always looking to trade that pick, and I don't think Mariota's the answer. And obviously, these leaking about Zach Bregberger being a poor man's Tom Brady is funny. I mean, he certainly could be, and I think we had a second and third round grade on him, so we think he certainly could be an NFL quarterback, and I think that system's a really good fit for him. But I think Tennessee always plan on trading this, and I think the curious thing to look at is kind of who they've been working out recently, and sometimes that's a misnomer who teams are working out, and they kind of want to send curveballs. But the fact that Titans are working on a lot of receivers is very intriguing, because if they trade with the Chargers at 17, none of those guys are going to be there. So maybe they're considering not going Leonard Williams as well. I think that's what Tennessee is really intriguing here. I was talking to Justice earlier, and my kind of question is, how much does Leonard Williams really benefit that team for the next 5 years? With 2 solid pass rushes, at least what they're assuming they are going to be, and Arakpo and Derek Morgan, and then Jarrell Casey, how much more is Leonard Williams really going to add to that defense, take him to the next level? I'm not sure a lot. So I think Leonard Williams is the best player in this draft, and I think he's clearly a better talent that I have my roster, if I'm starting a roster from scratch, than a Kevin White or an Amari Cooper. I could see why a team like the Tennessee Titans might say, hey, if we have Mettenberger and we can add a Kevin White or Amari Cooper to a Kendall Wright, Justin Hunter receiving core with Taylor Lewan at left tackle, I can see why that offense might be a little more intriguing and maybe produce more value for the Titans in the long run. So I think the Titans could go a lot of directions. I don't think it's a lock that it's Mariota trade or Leonard Williams. I think it's likely it's Leonard Williams. That seems like be the consensus pick. But the fact they're working out receivers, I don't think should be kind of dismissed, because they're kind of wasted workouts for the most part. They could be working out second, third round options, and they're choosing a lot of these first round guys to consider. So whether that means a Bears trade still in play, which would be very surprising, or they think they can take one of those 2 guys at 2, we'll see what happens. But I think that the Mariota Chargers thing it seems likely. The Jets seem like an option still for Mariota, and the Browns as well, both those being more Raiders picks. So I think it's kind of Rivers to Titans, or sticking at 2 and maybe not taking Leonard Williams. So still a lot of things open for the Tennessee Titans, but Williams is a safe pick. I think receivers certainly still in play.
When you move down to the Jaguars and that third pick, they were the wild card last year and took Blake Bortles. I don't know any person that called that pick there. Are they as wild card this year? We've talked about it a lot on this show. It seems like Vic Beasley's kind of the perfect fit. But if Leonard Williams was to quote unquote fall from the top 2, do they have to consider that they're at 3?
Yeah, I don't think so. I think this team is fairly. I mean, I already have Odrick there, and I think they're fairly deep at that position, not needing another guy. But I think Beasley would make a lot of sense. I think there's some question marks about Beasley that people maybe aren't talking about as much. But that pick seems to be locked in as Dante Fowler. I don't like the pick that much. I think Fowler is actually a perfect fit for the Jets and what Todd Bowles wants to do at outside linebacker. I'm not sure he's a perfect fit for the Jaguars, but it seems that's their pick right now. But like you mentioned, they were a wild card last year, and even though they have 2 capable receivers and Allen Robinson, who I was a big fan of, Marquise Lee, again, a team like I taking a Kevin White there would be surprising for sure. But again, the Jaguars were a wild card last year, and maybe giving Bortles on the receiving options what they're looking for. So as much as I think it's people want to assume Leonard Williams 2 and Dante Fowler 3, that seems like it's going to be probably 67% chance likely. There's still a chance these teams can throw a curveball, and it's hard to say how much these teams really like these receivers. I know some people in the league and out of the media, including myself, doesn't think the receiver class is comparable to last year. I think these guys are being all a bit overhyped, but maybe teams feel differently, and we'll see if Kevin White can be a top 3 or 4 pick as well. So I think it's kind of locked in as Dante Fowler's the pick, but I can see him still going in a couple of directions. I would say it's Fowler over Beasley most likely, but while Beasley's a good fit, and I would take Bud Dupree there, I think it's going to be Fowler.
Fowler's not a force player, Justice. I know you're not a
Right.
huge fan of his. Um, what
On a
a pick
relative
like
scale, I mean, I see him as kind of a late first round, early second round type. I don't think I think his peak is Chandler Jones, and I don't think you take, okay, this guy's peak is Chandler Jones at third overall. But I kind of agree with Eric. That kind of seems like the pick, but like you said, I mean, curveballs.
Speaking of curveballs, the Oakland Raiders pick 4. So that seems like the pick that everybody has an idea of what they're going to do, and everybody's idea is different. Eric, where do you think that they go with this pick?
Yeah, I thought for a while that I know the Raiders are looking to trade down. Receivers still very intriguing on their board, but they don't want to take one at 4. That's repeated what I had heard for a while now, is that the Amari Cooper aspect would be probably the best fit for what their offense wants to do, but they don't want to take a receiver at 4 is what I've heard repeatedly. So we'll see if that happens on draft. I know a lot of people are mocking a receiver to the Raiders, but I don't believe that's really what they want to do it for. Now, will they do that because they can get a trade down? Possibly. But I think they're going to look for a trade down of some extent. I think they really want to add to their defense. I know they've had interest in Preston Smith of Mississippi State as a second-round pick, but with him not being there and maybe not a lot of great edge players available in the early second round when they pick again, I think they'll be getting an edge player in this draft in the top 4 or 5 or 6 picks, wherever they end up trading to, even the top 12 if they end up the Cleveland Browns trade. I think a guy like an Alvin Dupree would make a lot of sense as well. I know Justice kind of agrees in that sense when we talked earlier, but I think even an Eric Armstead or some kind of front 7 player make a lot of sense for a team looking to add to their edge players. And I think if you add a guy like Alvin Dupree or an Eric Armstead to a defense that already has Khalil Mack, you really got an exciting defense to work with. And while I think they're going to add to Derek Carr's offense in the later rounds of the draft, second, third, fourth round, they certainly want to add an edge player and a receiver early in this draft class. I think they'd rather go in that order as opposed to taking Amari Cooper and hoping a guy falls to the second round.
Justice, when you look at Washington at 5, if Mariota falls to 5, are they in play, or is that not happening in your opinion?
Man, I don't know. Just from the sniff test, I mean, you have to decide, like, you have to have a plan in place already for what you're going to get as far as assets back for RG3. And I don't know what the market for that is, to be totally honest. So, you know, I could see it happening. Like, it's not out of the realm of possibilities, but I can't see that being very likely. And from what everyone said is, like, Washington, what they want to do is, you know, kind of pick someone very conservatively. You know, just kind of go for the safe pick. And, I mean, it's too early to take a guy like Brandon Scherff, in my opinion. I mean, if he were picked at 5, I think he would have been the highest interior offensive lineman drafted since 1985 or something like that. So that's 3 decades. He's the best guard prospect in 3 decades. That's what you're saying, essentially. And we just saw Zach Martin be the first, you know, all-pro offensive lineman since the 50s, as far as, you know, coming in your rookie year. So you have that whole aspect. I mean, they're almost like a dark horse candidate for, like, Amari Cooper, right? Like, that's kind of the one where if you're looking at, like, a safe pick, Amari Cooper's kind of, like, he's going to come in and be San Antonio Holmes, you know, instantly. I don't know how high, you know, his upside's going to be, but that roster is so deprived of talent that you can't say, you know, Amari Cooper, they don't need a receiver. It's like, well, Washington kind of just needs something. Like, they really don't have any identity at this point. So it wouldn't surprise me if that pick ended up being Cooper. Or, like, I mean, I guess Scherff, but that's just still too high for me.
Eric, at 5, you know, you talk safe, and Scherff seems like safe in spades. On the opposite side of that, a guy that we all like, Bud Dupree, that seems like a risky type of pick for Washington there. What makes sense to you for 5 there?
Yeah, I think I've heard the same. I'm not sure Justin heard that as well, but I had heard repeatedly that the Redskins want to play safe, and I think the 2 guys they're hoping for are probably Dante Fowler, who the Jaguars take him, he won't be there, and Brandon Scherff. And I'm with Justice on that, too, as far as taking Scherff. You look at Zach Martin, and that's probably what the best-case scenario for taking Scherff at 5 overall. And while Scherff is a great prospect, I think you can slide immediately at guard. You're asking a lot for a rookie to live up to Zach Martin, rare expectations like Justice has alluded to. I mean, you can't expect a guy to come in and be Zach Martin again just because Zach Martin just happened. So I think taking a guard at 5 would be a bit much for me. But in general, in this class, the feeling I get is teams are going to probably go one of 2 ways in the early picks in the first round: is take a very high upside guy or take a guy that I view as very, very safe. And I think guys in the middle are going to be question marks. So that's why you're going to see guys like Brandon Scherff and Danny Shelton, who I think are more late first round talents, are going to go in the top 12 picks because teams know what they're going to get out of this. So without guys with great upside, really, I would say for the most part, Leonard Williams, the only guy I think has a safe top 10 grade among most draft classes. Outside of that, you're kind of looking at, in most years, mid-first round talents. As much as I love Bud Dupree and guys like that, in most years he's a mid to late first round talent. He's going to go in the top 7 or 8 picks this year. So I think you're going to get teams who realize no top 10 value in the top 10 or anything that's really safe or really high upside. That's why I think Brendan Sheriff fits in. So the Redskins, I don't think Mariota's an option, but I definitely think a safe pick like Sheriff or Dante Fowler are there. I think that Mark Cooper is a good point, and it's hard to say exactly what the new GM is looking for and what he thinks of the current roster. That's what the real wild card is here. Is this guy's known for being a great talent evaluator, and we have no idea what he thinks of his current roster. So I think the receiver aspect is interesting. I haven't looked at their cap situation. They can cut any guys recently, but that'll play a big part, I'm sure, and what he does for the future. But it's a bit of a wild card, but I think Cooper's an interesting pick, but I think Sheriff's the guy at 5 if Fowler's not there, maybe surprisingly.
Yeah, and I get a lot of questions too about people, being like, Amari Cooper, where would he have ranked last class? And Bud Dupree, where would he have ranked last class? And like Amari Cooper is kind of being looked at as like the consensus top receiver at this point, and he would have been behind, for me at least, Odell Beckham Jr. So he would have been the 4th receiver on the board last year. Last year, I would have had Jadeveon Clowney, Khalil Mack, and Anthony Barr ahead of Dupree by probably like a tier. So, I mean, yeah, just the top talents are just so different in this class when you look, as opposed to last class.
Is New York the floor for Mariota, or can the floor be a lot further down, Eric?
I think the floor, to be honest, is 4 to the Oakland Raiders. Not saying the Raiders will take him, but I don't think he gets past that pick. Not because the Redskins are going to have anything to do with it, but I think the Raiders might take a little bit less than market value for that pick. They would love an extra pick, especially an extra second-round pick. So going from 4 to 6 with the Jets or going from 4 to 12 with the Browns, depending if they feel their guy can still be there. And if they do want Dupree, maybe 6 as low as they can go. And if they are okay with other guys, maybe a Vic Beasley or take a chance on a Randy Gregory, maybe they'll be there at 12. But I think 4 is the lowest Mariota goes. I think that's probably the most likely spot for him right now, and the Jets would make a lot of sense trading up for him. But yeah, I think that the Jets is an interesting fit. It's they kind of leaked out now that maybe Geno Smith isn't the answer. I think that team is really built to win now, surprisingly. Adding Brandon Marshall, and if they can get the most out of Eric Decker and Jeremy Curley just for a year, and kind of other guys hit like Jason Morrow kind of take the next step, and the running backs can get by. Their offensive line is strong. Their secondary, they've added a ton of guys to that secondary. Their front 3 is the best in football, and if they can add their pass rusher, I think to add some depth there, that team's going to be tough to beat for any team in the AFC consistently if that team can score. So you're kind of asking a lot of those offensive guys to hit, but if they do hit, you're looking at a team that's a pass rush away from being one of the best teams in the AFC if Fitzpatrick can make the most in Chan Gailey's offense where he had success before. So it's tough to say what the Jets would do if Mariota's not there, but I think they would gladly kind of take a chance at Mariota if they can get him for a cheap price. But if not, that team's going to look for an instant plug-and-play guy now like a Dupree or Amari Cooper, and that team could be a playoff team with or without Mariota as a pick.
And I'll say this about Todd Bowles. In his 2 years in Arizona, he never had, a dominant pass rusher off the edge. He was able to manufacture a lot of pressure. So giving him a toy like Dupree, he likes bigger outside linebackers. So, Dupree, I'm not sure Beasley or Gregory are fits so much there. Or maybe, maybe he just never got a chance to get one of those guys when he was in Arizona. But and Fowler, like you said, that's kind of his prototype. They like those guys that can be flexible and play outside backer in a base, and if he wants to go 4 down lineman and they can do different things, that would make sense. So it is interesting because it's a new regime, but like you said, they are kind of built on defense and with the weapons on offense to win quickly. So you wonder how much that goes into play with a pick like Mariota, and if he can be the answer for that team.
Yeah, and I think the Jets are in this win-now mode, like you mentioned. I think Fowler's the best pick for them. Dupree would make some sense, but after that, there's really no pass rush in the first round that really makes sense for the Jets. It's really Amari Cooper after that is the only guy that really would fit their draft needs at all. So I think the Jets are a really interesting pick. I think the Falcons are hard to figure out at 8 with all the pass rushes kind of falling down draft boards. They're the 2 hardest spots, I think, to kind of figure out what even position they're going to take, nonetheless which player.
Justice, the Bears, I mean, it's another new regime. They have Jay Cutler. Are they in on Mariota at all to you, or no?
I don't think they can. It's the same thing with the Redskins thing. It's you got to have a plan for Jay Cutler, and no one's trading for that Jay Cutler contract. So you're just kind of stuck with him. You're kind of stuck in purgatory for a little bit. But they're trying to transit. Like They ran a 4-3 defense last year, and it was a very bad 4-3 defense. And now you're asking those guys to transition to a 3-4 and bring in other talent. So it's like like if they don't use that pick to kind of transition into Vic Fangio's defense, I'd be super surprised. I know. I think that's kind of the floor if like a guy like Leonard Williams does start to fall. I think that's probably the floor for him. Kind of like a quote unquote like dark horse pick would be like Eric Armstead. I know like the media doesn't love him as much as teams do, but teams think he's a stud. I mean, like that was one guy who, when you start talking to scouts and stuff, people are just like, yeah, he's a stud, like he's an absolute first round pick, things like that. And it was like, oh, okay, y'all think of him like more than people out here do. As a 5 technique, I mean, they just need help so much on that defensive line. They probably could bring in another rusher too. I know they got McAfee, but he's more of an interior pass rusher than anything else, even though they're probably going to try to play him on the edge in a 3-4 defense. They're just kind of an interesting spot, but if they don't use that pick on, a front 7 player, I'd be pretty surprised. Or maybe even a receiver, but even then, like, I don't think it's Amari Cooper, maybe it's Kevin White. I don't know if White's going to be there at that point. Teams who need a receiver might, trade up for him too. So we'll just see how that one kind of shakes out, but I'd say there's probably an 80% chance that they either go defensive line or edge there.
Eric, when you look at that transition that Justis talked about, how does this class fit into that transition? Because it seems like there's a lot of edge talent, but as you guys talked about earlier, they're more mid-round edge talent. And is Armstead really a player there at 7?
Absolutely. I think Justin is right in this. I think if Leonard Williams is there, he makes the most sense. Kind of the opposite of the Titans, where we wonder what's the real value of Leonard Williams. I mean, that Bears front 7 is so devoid of talent moving forward that Leonard Williams can make a huge difference for that team. So I would say right now it's Leonard Williams and Eric Armstead, the 2 guys I would certainly kind of plug there. I think Eric Armstead probably goes as low. People say 15. I think he'd go well before 15. The Giants at 9 are super intriguing for Armstead as well. So there's legit interest in Armstead. I'm with Justice in the top 10, kind of the Giants where I have him pegged right now. But as far as the Bears are concerned, I had heard before that their receiver they like a lot compared to other teams is Devontae Parker. I think kind of comparing what he can do that Demaryius Thomas did is kind of what they're looking at as well, and kind of pairing with Alshon Jeffrey. Devontae Parker may be that guy. So if the draft plays out, the Bears could have whatever receiver they want at 7 overall. If the Raiders kind of move down and take Bud Dupree, no one else really needs a top receiver in that class. You wonder how early is too early for Devontae Parker to move there as well. So I think if I was them for sure, I would say Leonard Williams, of course, and if he's not there, Eric Armstead makes a lot of sense to me in terms of just having a talent to work with, and he's by far the best talent in that defense as soon as he gets there. But the Devontae Parker aspect's interesting. If they want to kind of give Jay Cutler a guy who can make plays away from his frame and make up for his velocity with poor accuracy, I think Devontae Parker is maybe the best guy in this receiver class to do that for immediately. So I can understand why Parker is intriguing of their receivers, but I think it's going to probably be Eric Armstead or Leonard Williams if they're there. But if it is a receiver, I'm pretty confident it's going to be either Amari Cooper or Devontae Parker, and I would kind of lean Devontae Parker from what I've heard.
That's interesting because I know a lot of people within the draft community have Parker at least at their 3rd receiver and more down 4 or 5. So that's interesting. The Falcons and Dan Quinn and this Scott Pioli in charge, or is it Thomas Dimitroff, or who's in charge? If it was Dimitroff, wouldn't it be kind of easy just to put Shane Ray there?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's kind of the spot there where you had the best defensive player. But I don't know. Looking at their, doing my mock draft, that's a pick I can't figure out for the most part, because with Gregory having his issues, Vic Beasley having issues as well, Alvin Dupree probably not going to be there based on, recent view, and Dante Fowler not going to be there. Who do you take as an edge player? And they can go offensive line if they want to. Sam Baker's coming back. They can go running back. Todd Gurley, maybe it's the highest he goes, and I wouldn't really hate that pick. The guy I'm kind of interested in now is their cornerbacks, and do any of these cornerbacks really fit what Dan Quinn wants? And they'll kind of have their pick, and I think a Marcus Peters would be interesting as well if they want to go that high with a guy like him. They've kind of openly said they're okay with character issue guys. People kind of assume that was Gregory, but maybe they're kind of alluding to the fact that maybe a guy like Marcus Peters they can get past. So they can go so many directions. I think the Falcons, they would probably love to trade back because they need a lot of talent in that defense and offense. But I think if there's no edge player there, Marcus Peters is kind of an intriguing guy. I think would make a lot of sense.
Justis, Eric talked about Eric Armstead at 9 to the Giants. Another name that's been bandied about there, or not name, but position, is wide receiver, even after Odell Beckham in 2014. What do you see the Giants leaning towards there?
See, I don't know if they'd look at receiver because, one, you have Beckham, and then two, Victor Cruz is coming back. You didn't have Victor Cruz last season, so that's almost like an addition to your team anyway. One thing that I would think of is offensive tackle, because Pugh can knock in the guard, and Richburg was playing guard last season, and now they have to replace a center. So if they got a tackle there, I wouldn't be surprised if they went for a guy like Pete or even a guy like Lyle Collins, and just kind of reshuffle that offensive line to get their best 5 guys out there. Because, I mean, it doesn't really matter, but, like, the best guard that you're going to be able to get, or either guard or center that you're going to be able to get, isn't going to be able to match the impact you can get from getting a better tackle and then improving at guard by putting Pugh there, and then improving at center by putting Richburg inside. So it almost helps like three positions right in front of Eli Manning. And I mean, that's what you're really betting on. I mean, Coughlin got a year extension. So he's telling, look at the future, and really what that whole team is betting on is, can Eli Manning get us through this? The other position that I'd look at is probably, 3 technique for him. But I don't think there's a 3 that's worth being picked up that high. I mean, they're a team that I could see like trading back potentially for a guy like Michael Bennett, or a guy, or like maybe even trading up in the second round for a guy like Grady Jarrett, because I know Grady Jarrett's a guy who's like quote unquote like rising boards, because he's reshaped his body twice already this offseason. He dropped a lot of weight for the Senior Bowl, and then he put on all that weight again for the Combine, and he tested very well for the Combine. So he's kind of an interesting guy that people are saying, might even sneak into the end of the first round to like the Patriots, and I don't know what they would do with Easley and him together. And I know some people have even gone out and compared him to like a Geno Atkins, which to me is a little rich. But I mean, that's really where I see him at that point. I mean, it's hard to pin down where Andres Pete is going to come off, because I think Pete is going to be like the top tackle to come off the board. The Giants just make a lot of sense.
And that was going to be my question for Eric. Is this where Andres Pete goes? The player that a lot of the draft community hated so much for most of the process, and it seems like he's going to go at least top 15.
Yeah, I would say probably top 16 is where I think the lowest he goes. I think that Houston Texans pick, not that they would take him, but a team like the Carolina Panthers would love to get their chance at Andres Pete. Even the Detroit Lions might trade up, Bengals might trade up to get a guy like Pete who has the capability of being a franchise left tackle. But yeah, I think kind of to what Justis said, the 3 guys that I'm kind of pigeonholing for the Giants are Pete, Lyle Collins, kind of which tackle they prefer. Collins more of a plug-and-play right tackle. Pete has more left tackle upside, even though I think Collins is the best tackle in this class regardless. Or is it Eric Armstead and going for the guy who kind of, if any guy in the past couple of years can match Jason Pierre-Paul's upside, it's going to be Eric Armstead. So I think they're looking for more defensive line help. I think Armstead makes a lot of sense there, but that's certainly the spot. I think Pete makes a lot of sense, but Pete can even go above that. I wouldn't be surprised at all if the team kind of invests in upside. The Falcons even moving out from Sam Baker and moving him inside and making Pete their long-term left tackle. Pete can go a lot of different directions, and people, I know teams a lot. I know some scouts in the West Coast graded Pete above Leonard Williams as a prospect, at least in season. That may have changed since then, but scouts have always thought Pete had franchise left tackle ability, and you can't appreciate that in a draft that isn't that strong, and left tackles aren't too easy to get. So I think Pete is probably going to go somewhere between that 9 spot and 16, and 9's very likely where he might end up.
At the 10th pick with the St. Louis Rams, is this where we would probably start to see the run on wide receivers happen with the Rams, or is it going to be about protecting Nick Foles? I mean, they just addressed offensive line last year with Greg Robinson. Can they double dip?
Yeah, I mean, it might be about protecting Brett Hundley for the future, because I think he might be their guy in the second round. But I think offensive line is what they're certainly looking for, and I'm not sure another receiver is really going to help. And while I don't like most of their receivers, I'm trying to think right now, they have Kenny Britt, Tavon Austin, Chris Gibbons, Stedman Bailey. I mean, they have a lot of invested in their receivers, so taking another guy is going to mean you have to cut one of your recent top 100 picks. I'm not sure they want to do that. So I think receivers probably out. It's a question of which offensive lineman do they want to have, and I think a Greg Robinson bookend with Lyle Collins would be an awesome offensive line. That might be a team if Sheriff doesn't go 5th overall, the Redskins, the Rams probably the most likely landing spot then too. So I think I keep pushing Lyle Collins because I think it should be Lyle Collins, but I think Brandon Sheriff, if he's there, is probably more likely to pick. I don't think it's a receiver yet, and that kind of goes to the point where I think sometimes people have kind of overestimated this receiver class. I can certainly see a situation where there's one top 10 receiver taken, and the Vikings, Browns, Saints, and Dolphins all have their chance at whoever they want to get. I think if they talk about there could be 3 receivers, I think there could be 1, maybe even 0, depending on what the Bears want to do at 7, and if the draft kind of falls, which it's looking like right now. So I think the receiver run probably starts if the Vikings and Browns want to do it. There's no guarantee there either. I think the Rams at 10 are going to stay away from receiver and go offensive line. I hope La'el Collins, but I think Brendan Sheriff's a pick if he's there.
Yeah, that's an interesting point that you made on the receivers, and that was my whole rationale. Is they're kind of in a bad spot for their needs. So in my most recent mock, I had them actually flipping first-round picks with the Dolphins, so the Dolphins could trade up for Kevin White. Because, like you said, I mean, you could, in this class, you obviously can see, all right, one guy goes off the board, either being White or Cooper, and then just the other one just consistently slipping down because of the way the team needs just rack down one by one. So I had like Miami coming up for him, and then them just waiting there, and I believe I had them picking like La'el Collins, and not even necessarily as a tackle. I mean, Greg Robinson is moving from guard to tackle, so they have a guard spot that unless they think a guy like Barrett Jones can come and fill, there's kind of that open spot there, and if they want to transition La'el Collins from a guard and then slowly move him out to right tackle or something like that, I could totally see that happening. Yeah, I mean, I'm pretty much with you on that one.
When you look at the Vikings and Mike Zimmer, is this where a guy like Marcus Peters, if he doesn't go at up where you talked about a little earlier, is this where Peters could come off the board? Or I've heard that Trey Waynes is more of a Zimmer corner, but maybe I just don't get Waynes, and that's just me, but I don't see that. What are your thoughts on the Vikings?
Yeah, I guess I didn't assume that they had as big of a cornerback need as everyone kind of alludes to, but I guess it certainly is a need. I know Kevin Johnson's been linked out there. I think Josh Norris had that in his mock draft I saw on TV the other day, so that's an interesting fit as well. It's kind of a plug-and-play guy. I kind of plugged in, like most people, I think, and just put Devontae Parker there. I think when Norv Turner kind of said that Charles Johnson is his best receiver, that kind of said they need a receiver pretty badly, and even after Mike Wallace, I think Parker can complement Mike Wallace really, really well and be kind of the mid-range threat for Teddy Bridgewater, where Wallace is the vertical guy. So I think Parker makes a lot of sense, and I think if the Bears don't take him, I think he will be there. But as far as that, I guess it's other cornerback, but maybe, Justice, you can help me as well. What position would they even look for outside of receiver and cornerback? Because I think offensive line's intriguing, but they don't really need a guard at that spot that badly. And I think they did a good job of adding talent to their defense and a lot of depth there, is they can go a lot of directions without having a big need. So I've kind of plugged Devontae Parker there because receiver is in need, and I think there's obviously an opportunity for cornerback. But outside of Parker, I'm not really sure who else is worth the value with that 11th overall pick.
Yeah, I'm pretty much with you on that one too, where I'm just plugging in Parker. I mean, who is it? Dave T. Thomas, who's been writing about the draft since I believe like the 80s, now does stuff with Scout.com, and he had some like little chat going on, and he was talking about how Devontae Parker bleeds purple. And I was like, okay, this guy's more well connected than I am, and he's already like hanging his hat on him being the pick. And I know people have talked about cornerback there. Kevin Johnson going that high is too high, I think, to me. I could see Waynes being like an upside type of pick, but even then, I'm not in love with Waynes either. And you talked about the interior offensive line. I'm with you. I mean, 11 is really kind of a spot. Like 11's kind of a game changer spot, but not so much because it's later in the first round. But like that and the Jets pick are two that I'm just like, I have no idea where the hell you guys are gonna go. So if it's not Parker, I really have no clue. But I like Parker is the leader in that race to me, but I don't feel confident in it, so it's just kind of a wild card.
Getting to the Browns and their 2 picks, it sounds like they want to package these picks and go up. I mean, is that what you're hearing, Eric?
Well, what I heard about the process is it was kind of Mariota or bust for them taking a quarterback. I know people have kind of reported elsewhere they're looking for a quarterback as well, but when I heard that, it kind of made a lot of sense to me because it's what else you can do with like another developmental quarterback who might not work out and Johnny Manziel. I don't really see the upside there unless you really feel that Brett Hundley or Garrett Grayson can start for you by the end of his rookie year, which I don't think either one of those guys should be expected to do so. I don't really see the value in adding a quarterback. So that kind of meshed what I heard, and I think it's a good idea. I think if you're moving out from Johnny Manziel, either get Marcus Mariota or just bite the bullet for a year and wait till next year without quarterbacks here. That's your best move. I know Danny Shelton is the guy I think they want if they don't move up. He seems like the guy they need, and I think having him and Phil Taylor kind of makes that nose tackle position from a question mark to having 2 guys who can capably fill it, and that's kind of a good fit in that sense too. But I think outside Danny Shelton, their second pick, I'm not sure. They were so receiver averse last year that maybe they won't even take a guy like Brashad Perryman. maybe offensive tackle, but that's not a huge need as well. Maybe another defensive lineman, maybe a pass rusher. And really, in 19, they can go a lot of different directions. I think they'll just go best player available if they're smart. But I think for sure Denny Shelton is one of the guys they're targeting at 12 if they don't move up. And after 19, we'll see what happens there.
On the other hand, you have the Saints, who we discussed this earlier on one of the earlier podcasts, and we really, I mean, it's like a half fire sale / half rebuild / like we're going to keep Drew Brees and compete still. I don't know if they know what they're doing, but where do they go at 13 with guys like Randy Gregory, Marcus Peters, on the board, and that defense needing help, but also they need weapons, it seems like, for Drew Brees in that offense. I mean, they could really go anywhere, right?
Yeah, I think so. I've kind of plugged there, and I really have no idea what the Saints are thinking on draft day with 2 first-round picks, and like you mentioned, more of like a rebuild. I mean, they really can't expect any of these guys to contribute immediately to a playoff team. I think anything they get out of these guys their rookie year is kind of gravy because they're clearly building for the future. I've kind of plugged Shane Ray there in the past, but I think Shane Ray is really falling. I think he's being picked in the 20s, maybe even out of the first round, as I don't want to get too bold there, but I think he's a guy I'm not sure where he's going to really fit. But I think Vic Beasley, that's the play as I have him right now, and kind of my constantly tweaked mock draft, I think he can fall there. I'm not sure he's a great fit, but I think they're going to have the best player available no matter what. But you mentioned Peters, I think cornerback, probably that's where the cornerback value picks up. And staying on cornerback, you mentioned Trey Waynes. I'm not really sure who's in love with Trey Waynes as a first-round pick, and I think we've kind of assumed at this point that he's going to be a first-round pick, but I've heard a lot about Marcus Peters, about Kevin Johnson, about Jalen Collins. I don't hear a lot about Trey Waynes and who really likes him as a first-round pick. And generally those guys at this point in the draft process, similar to Shane Ray, at this point in the draft process, if they're not getting a lot of buzz or any buzz, it's usually bad news. So we'll see if those guys fall undrafted. But I think the Saints will have a lot of options. If they're looking for a cornerback especially, they'll have kind of almost their pick unless the top 10 team surprises and take one. But I think a corner like Marcus Peters or Jalen Collins would make sense. Or I think Vic Beasley if he's available. Or God forbid, Bud Dupree's there. That's probably the pick as well.
Justice, Miami needs help for Ryan Tannehill. Sorry, one of the kids crying. Wide receiver, is that where you can see a wide receiver going here to Miami?
Yeah, I can see a guy like if Parker is still on the board, that makes a lot of sense to me. Yeah, they're kind of an interesting team because of how much money they spent. I know some people have said offensive line. I'm not sure how much their offensive line needs help when they're already investing so much into what they have currently. They're kind of in an odd spot. I could see them taking a corner if like a guy like Trey Waynes starts to fall, but I'm not sure he falls to this point. It's just kind of an interesting spot. Absolutely, if they have a receiver there, they're almost a trade-up candidate to me. Like I said, in my last mock, I had them moving up. They're kind of in a bad spot for what their needs are. So I could see them kind of punting the pick and just picking up like a third-rounder and just moving down. Or I could see them, trading up future assets to move up earlier in the first round.
All right, last one on the picks, and then we're just a couple rapid-fire questions for Eric, we can get him out of here. San Francisco, new regime. Coaching wise, same type of general manager at the top, obviously. They seem like another team that nobody has really pinned down what they're going to do. But with losing Justin Smith and needing help on that defense, is this kind of Eric Armstead's floor at this point?
Yeah, I think so. I think most people have had a good reason. They could certainly use more depth in the defensive line. Kind of replacing Justin Smith with Darnell Dockett's not really going to do it for him. And then while they do have Tank Carradine, I'm not sure if that's really the only guy they need in their front three. So I think Eric Armstead will make a lot of sense there. But I think they'll really go kind of best defensive player available. They've lost so many guys and just want to stockpile talent. I think outside of Armstead, it's been kind of Marcus Peters who's made the most sense to me in that spot. I think if they're both gone, that's where it gets really intriguing. They look at a receiver. I think Jalen Collins still fits. He's kind of like, for some teams, I think, more ready, but less upside Marcus Peters. So I think, kind of different. Peters more of a press guy. Collins more of an off-man guy more effectively. But I think Collins will make a lot of sense if they want to add to their corner. But I think overall it'll be defense. They're going to go best player available, I think. I think they want to kind of keep retooling and keep rebuilding that team overall after so many retirings and after Jim Harbaugh. I'm curious to see how Trent Baalke wants to put his stamp on the post-Jim Harbaugh era. It could be a splash, or it could be just a guy they're going to plug and play at cornerback. So I think if Armstead or Peters are there, they'll probably be one of the two picks. If not, Jalen Collins or maybe a surprise type guy.
All right, real quick so we can get you guys out of here. I appreciate your time, both of you. P.J. Williams had the off-the-field incident. How much is that impacting his draft stock right now?
I think for the most part, probably out of the first round, just because there's other cornerbacks in this class that are talented. But I always want to reiterate that character questions with guys are only question marks for the future if they're going to be issues in the future. If this is a one-time thing, he made a mistake, which I'm not defending it at all, but obviously people in everyday world make this mistake all the time. It shouldn't be reflective of his future character unless other factors are indicated. So I think if teams are okay with him before this incident and he can kind of clear that up in interviews after the incident, I think he's still going to be a second-round pick.
The other two, and maybe definitely more serious with Frank Clark, and Dorial Beckham-Green. What are you hearing about their stock? And is Clark's been a guy that we've bandied about if he's even draftable, and then obviously Dorial. What are you hearing on their stock and how the NFL feels about them?
Yeah, Clark, I haven't heard much on him. I know Justis is a fan of him based on Force Players. I'm pretty sure if that's right, and Justis can correct me if that's wrong. But
Right.
but I think there's still probably a dark horse chance he's a late round pick, just because he's I never liked his film that much, to be honest. I haven't heard any buzz about him because I think he's a strong side defensive end who really can't finish plays in the backfield based on film, and I'm not sure what the really role for that kind of guy is. But certainly if he has athletic upside, maybe he's an intriguing guy. I think he's probably going to go undrafted. I'd be surprised if he gets drafted at all. The Cowboys as a fit, I thought it'd been very funny because I can't see the Cowboys taking Frank Clark and having Greg Carter in the same defensive line. But Green Beckham is interesting because I know there was a lot of buzz, and maybe you guys can help get a better pulse of the draft than I have about what people in the media are saying. But a lot of thought was Dorial Green Beckham was going to be a first-round pick. I had heard repeatedly throughout the process, as soon as he left Oklahoma, that he was not going to be a first-round pick, and I'd be shocked if he was. I know some people have already made some bets that he wouldn't be a first-round pick, and I would have gladly taken those as well. But the two teams I'm looking for, I think before the Torrey Smith left Baltimore was a really intriguing fit because they're desperate for a receiver. I think Torrey Smith could have guided him. But I think the two teams is Torrey Smith's new team, the 49ers, which would be, I think they're at pick 45 in the second round. That seems like an intriguing fit for a team looking for an upside guy, and we know Trent Baalke is not opposed to taking Missouri guys with character issues. So Green Bay kind of fits that mold. And then certainly the Seattle Seahawks, there's a real possibility they can either get him in the late second round if a team like the 49ers pass, or they can move up for him, I think, to get him. I know they have serious interest, and that was kind of the only team in the late first round that would have intrigued me as far as taking Green Beckham. But I don't think he's a first-round pick. I think most teams are going to stay away. As far as Green Beckham, not to go too much about him, but it's interesting because he's had multiple issues in his past, including drug charges as well as domestic violence issues, and he's gotten away with a lot of drug charges in his college career. And you got to wonder what that really has impacted on his ability to kind of handle adversity and what he's going to be like as a professional when he can't get away with those things as easily. So I think that's part of it. As a person, he's a rather quiet, more deflective guy personality-wise, not a guy you'd expect to kind of learn from his mistakes. It's more about, will he get in trouble again, and does he have a support system to prevent those things in trouble? So I don't think you're going to change Dorial Green Beckham. I don't think teams can feel that way. It's about, does he have the support system to stay out of trouble? And no matter what that support system is, it's always going to be a lingering concern. So I think for the most part, teams are going to have to kind of take a swing at Dorial Green Beckham, and not in the first round and probably in the second round. So I think the 49ers and Seahawks, I'd be fairly surprised if he went anywhere else besides those two teams.
All right, Eric. Well, we appreciate you hanging out with us tonight. Go ahead and tell us about the draft guide one more time and where we can get that and when we can pick it up.
Cool. Yeah. Draft guide. It's shooting for a Saturday finish and a Sunday release. Sunday afternoon release. It'll be. I'll post a link on OptimumScouting.com. It'll be available via Dropbox. Once again, it's only $1.99. It'll be over 300 reports available for purchase, and hopefully it's worthwhile. I know some great draft guides out there. I know Dane Brugler's done a great job. Ian Warren, who actually is part of our draft team at Optimum Scouting, did his own draft guide. I've seen that very good as well. So a lot of good draft guides out there. Hopefully, $1.99 a cup of coffee. You guys can get a draft guide and see if it's worthwhile. So thanks for having me on, guys. I appreciate it. I know it's late night for me at least, but it was awesome coming out here and talking the draft anyways between my scouting reports. I appreciate it, guys.
Well, we appreciate you joining us, Eric, and have a great night.
You too.
Justis, anything to add as we head out of here, man?
No, I think we pretty much covered it. I think we're pretty much done.
All right, buddy. Well, I appreciate you hanging out with us, and everybody get the new picture of Justis so we can do some more memes on the internet, and we'll be back next week. Finish up draft talk, and then 2 weeks the draft. So we'll have a show the week of the draft and do a mock draft so we can piss everybody off as much as possible. And
Timeline's gonna be so lit. Timeline's gonna be so lit.
Yep, and our owner or producer John Ames is gonna be pissed off because we're gonna live tweet that son so he can get all kinds of angry. All right. Well, thanks for hanging out with me tonight, Justis, and thanks for getting us Eric tonight to save the show. So I appreciate it, man.
Always.
All right. Have a good night, everybody.